I think the power of what you're onto is that as you start to learn more how to quantify the target, viewer or the person you're engaging with, and then also on the brand side, how do you do the back office side of like quantifying that? Now you have something that's far more educated than it ever was in the 60s, 80s.
Welcome to Long Run Labs, a weekly podcast from the team behind For the Long Run, telling the stories of those running the outdoor industry where endurance and entrepreneurship meet. I want to take a second to thank the sponsor of this episode, Sketch. I use Sketch every single day. It's how I schedule almost every meeting in my life. Sales calls, podcast recordings, intro chats, follow-ups, all of it. And the thing that really sold me is what happens after something changes. If someone needs to move a meeting, Sketch just handles it. It finds a new time that works for both of us, updates the calendar, and I usually don't even have to think about it. No email chains for me. No, sorry, that time no longer works. No back and forth. If your week involves talking to other people, Sketch gives you hours of your life back every week. It's not just a booking link, though they do have that too. It's a system that protects your time and keeps things moving without friction. I'm partnering with them on Long Run Labs because I genuinely use it and because it feels like infrastructure for modern work. And I want everyone else to use it too, because when you use it, it already knows your availability and we can book a meeting faster. Check out sketch.com/longrunlabs for a very special offer so you can give it a try and add time back to your work week. That's skej.com/longrunlabs. And welcome back. We have Jason Wiener joining on the podcast today. Jason, thanks so much for taking some time to chat.
Oh, thank you, man.
I've been looking forward to this one for a while. We've had some fun conversations. You have a very diverse background of experience, and I'm excited to dive into it and learn more. So the first question, who is Jason?
Gosh, so I've been involved in sports and technology for the better part of 25, 30 years. My first foray was in adventure sports in the late 90s. I ran an agency in San Francisco for the better part of 6, 7 years. We were the agency of record for PowerBar. We represented Specialized bikes, built the RockShox site, Marin bike site. We co-produced the Olympics in 2002. And from there, I've stayed in technology and moved in and out of sports over the last, 20 years or so, and kind of seen a number of things kind of unfold over the last 3 decades.
So what are you focused on today? What keeps you busy?
So for the last about 2 years, we've been working on a development program for athletes, for junior athletes in the United States, to bring them up once they're kind of at a place in a program called NICA, which represents a lot of the interscholastic and high school racing. There's not a really clear path to go from interscholastic racing into regional and national racing and then ultimately to become elites. So you're starting to see some success in the United States with people like Chris Blevins, Haley Batten, obviously Kate Courtney, but there's no really well-codified path. So once you decide, I really love this, I'm coming out of like grade school, high school, and then where do I go from there? We've built a highly technical program that allows athletes to develop from where they are to where they want to be an elite and kind of educate them along the way. And, we have people like Lutzy involved, and it's been super cool to see the evolution of that in the last 2 years, because my daughter's one of the people dog fooding the product.
Very cool. How did that become of interest to you? Where did endurance sport enter the picture for you? Maybe let's wind back a few years.
Back in, I gotta say, must have been like the early 2010s. I was bitten by the running bug. I did, I had a life goal to do 12 half marathons in 12 months. Ended up teching on a bunch of triathlon and my first and only marathon in that kind of foray. So I became a kind of a quantified self nerd when that kind of evolution came. That was right when Strava was really kind of taking off. I think I'm in the first 10,000 users of Strava. So it was interesting. And I was always interested in the concepts of data in sports. And as we kind of progressed, my background is also in race cars. So I had a foray in the early 2000s in open wheel racing and did some work consulting with folks that were in IndyCar, and then ultimately kind of came back around in 2015 when I was able to hire McLaren to do some digital twin simulation work for us on a project that we were doing with Toyota. And from there, it was just, I got fascinated with this concept of how do you model physics in a computer. And as my daughter became age to race nationally, like I have all of this, domain expertise and I have contacts, like let's let's see what we can do to get her on, the podium of the national championships. And, our first year there, she came in fourth, which was amazing, which is the podium for U.S. nationals. And it was great. So we knew that there was a there. So the kind of the long story longer is this idea of how do you take data and how do you take physics and then how do you relate that to actual, like, representing that in action or in kind of planning towards like your goals as an athlete.
So you decide you want to extract the knowledge that's in your head, help your daughter improve on the bike, help a lot of other people improve on the bike. What did you do next?
Sure. So the first thing we did was I had a guy working for me when I was running product and technology for a company in San Diego. Ended up hiring this guy who created the breakaway, which, recently, he was the technical guy behind the breakaway in that team. And he was working for me, and we had this idea, like, how do we take the concepts that we had done for cars and then bring that to cycling? And he was the head of data behind the Ineos Grenadiers, behind Team Sky and Garmin Sharp. He also he played the primary role in the Eliud Kipchoge Breaking 2 effort by both Nike, and then ultimately that succeeded under Ineos. So we figured out, like, how do we test this hypothesis, with kids? So we built this model of the national championships course in Bear Creek. That was 2 years ago. And we got it accurate to about 30 seconds per 25 minute lap. And all we would need to know is we were able to infer the rolling resistance and kind of the technicalities of the course. And we could put any rider, given that if we could have access to any sort of data, even from practice through timing and scoring, we could then simulate what that rider would do. So we took girls that were in Adele's category, but not necessarily Adele, to see if we could find out where her weaknesses were. And then as we were proving this out, we were able to say, all right, cool. So we know that there are a particular set of climbs that we need to train for. So 12 weeks prior to Nats, we would actually break down the course and send her out into the forest with a performance coach and say, all right, cool, you need to go up this 9% grade for 2 minutes, and we're going to do intervals on that all afternoon. And we basically, kind of normalized out any of the challenges of the course by knowing it in advance.
So where do you go from here with that? I know you're close to a new release or new update. What's the vision for the app? I
mean, the basic vision is we want to win a gold medal in LA. So we want to put this in the hands of pros that are either currently in consideration or that are dark horses. So our go-to-market for that is we're looking for the 4 primary 2 men, 2 women on the elite side that are in consideration for the Olympics. We will provide the support, both from a data and any kind of training support that their coaches want. And then we want to also back 4 dark horses. So there are a handful of girls and boys that are there in the U23 ranks that, similar to how Riley Amos was in Paris, they're not necessarily at the elite level yet, but they've got all of this ability. So what that looks like is we actually break down the courses, and we've already started this. So last year we did work with Team USA on the U23 group that went overseas for their European block mid-year. And then we worked with a pro from another American team that, that's a significantly like strong female athlete. And we were able to help coach her in the World Cups that were Mount St. Anne and Lake Placid at the end of the season, and really kind of opened her eyes towards how do you approach breaking down a course so that you can not necessarily, gravitate towards the areas that are difficult, that everybody's, at this particular rock garden or drop. But we would actually say, here's an area, here are 3 spots on the course that you want to be mindful of, and let's go out there and look at them and then go ride at them in tempo to figure out how do you actually make these not challenges, and then find the areas on the course where you can attack and have your advantages. So, it's something that's great for like running, any kind of forward propulsion sport that you're using your body for.
So you talk about LA 2028. What implication does the Olympics being in the US have on your focus and more broadly?
I think it's super exciting because we obviously want the athletes to do well. I think, when you look at what USA Cycling is doing, that, Jim Miller is got really, he's got the bit between his teeth, and he's going like gangbusters to try to identify the talent that can produce a medal. The medal has a financial opportunity for the national governing body, obviously. So when you win a medal, you have an influx of cash that's associated with it. But I think, the stakes are high. It's awesome if we can help power somebody who can ultimately win a gold medal or a medal in general. It would be amazing.
Let's go back a little bit in your experience. I want to hear more about the agency work in San Francisco and the work with PowerBar and Specialized and the Olympics.
Sure. So that was really kind of around the turn of the century. So it's like, basically the end of the 90s. So we were coming off the kind of the web, we were getting to the end of the Web 1 bubble. And we had been approached to be brought into consideration for the agency of record review for PowerBar. It was a significant piece of business at that time. It was a 7-figure piece of business in the late 90s. So that's a lot of money. And so we came in, we ended up beating out a number of really high profile agencies because we were local to San Francisco. They were based in Berkeley, and we resonated with the team well. And, we supported them for the games that were prior to 2002. So I guess those were the 2000 summer games. And we basically represented them for all things digital, which is, there are parallels to kind of where you are with LRL right now in that, there was at the time you were running, kind of blind advertising, and you're just trying to get, basically users to come and hopefully come through the channels to ultimately buy bars or engage with your brand in some way, shape, or form. I think you guys are far more sophisticated today than we ever were at that period. But it's interesting. You can see these parallels between what DoubleClick was doing, which was the predominant advertiser in the 90s, late 90s, which ultimately got replaced by Google AdSense, and kind of the state of the podcasting world right now. And so it's super interesting. So from PowerBar, we were introduced to Specialized because the incumbent agency was transitioning off of Specialized as well. So we were brought in to rebuild their site pretty rapidly because they were losing the support from the other agency. And then ultimately in 2001, fast forward, we had an opportunity, and we kind of aggressively solicited MSNBC and the Salt Lake Organizing Committee to produce experiential content for the games. And we basically covered all of the outdoor venues and had these it was unprecedented at the time. And we had these fly-ins into the valleys of, whether it was Soldier Hollow or the whatever venue you were ultimately looking at, Park City. We then had very detailed content associated with the games. And I think we ended up having about 1 million people a day come into the site over the course of the Olympics. And it was great. We were at the end of the .com bubble too. So selling ads was impossible. So it was kind of one of the last straws in that agency's business because we just couldn't survive the lack of demand and the lack of motion in the business.
It's interesting you bring up the ad sales piece. So we connected through Second Nature originally. There was a conversation that Thomas Watson of Marathon Handbook flagged recently, and I'm trying to find it, but it was something, it was about Outside Interactive, and they were talking about how for them, media was always or is a pipeline to sell other stuff instead of drive subscription or drive membership. And so there was some chatter in there about ad sales and partnerships being a very challenging way to build a business. Yet at the same time, there are a lot of agencies that's their backbone, and it's not just their backbone, it's their front bone and every other bone as well. So talk to me about your take on that commentary related to Outside and kind of your thoughts on ad sales and partnerships as a vehicle for revenue.
Yes, I think there's a super interesting case there. So I think if we're talking about the earnings report, is that what he had flagged? They went on a buying spree several years ago when they picked up Trail Forks and Pink Bike and a number of other properties. And I think, distribution is a super interesting approach at how do you get top of funnel kind of volume. I think it ultimately depends on what you're selling. Like when we did programs in the past, like with Hyperdrive, we did a deal with Toyota where we built the R&D, and because they're a multi-billion-dollar company, they have these resources to bring our distribution around. And so if you do it wisely, I think there's a super interesting approach to driving revenue. I think the challenge with Outside is, in my opinion, they're a media company first. And so you've got media properties, and where I believe they would have issues is, they should be trying to sell memberships more so than people aren't necessarily buying the premium version of Trail Forks or whatever. So I think they're in kind of this weird period of times. And, it's not, I can't exactly say where they're going. They're obviously starting to find money, but I also know that that the profitability is probably coming as a result of cutting operational expenses as well. So I don't have a clear answer because I don't really know the underpinnings of Outside in particular. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. So what if you look at like a Free Trail or a Single Track or For the Long Run or any of these like media properties, Marathon Handbook, Sidious, like what's your take on that? And I've been noticing that more of these properties have been adding events to their portfolio, or like Joe with Everyday Ultra just added a race in April as well, in addition to his coaching business. Finn doesn't do coaching, but he has a couple of events. Dylan doesn't do coaching, but he has a paid membership program. I don't do coaching. I have a very poor paid membership program where I think 4 people are subscribers. So if you're dying to support forthelong.run/subscribe, you can pitch in a few shekels there. But curious your thoughts on these media properties and how and why they are diversifying beyond just media and sponsorships.
Well, so I think the thing that struck me most interestingly about LRL and the collective that you've built, it's super compelling, because when you look at advertising in and of itself, it's not performant. I mean, so I remember I ran product and technology for, of all things, a dating property. Like basically there were 40 sites in a portfolio. I think I want to say we had like 11 million monthly actives or something like that. But we were spending for our poorest performing properties, we were spending $1 million a month to make $1.1 million. And it was like, it was basically just keeping that particular property going. So we knew the attrition was there. I don't see dissimilar parallels from the current podcaster space. I think the thing that LRL and, the guys in Second Nature and girls in Second Nature that are starting to really figure it out, and I think you've talked about this on Substack, is that the motion changes once you're not trying to pay for the eyeball or pay for the CAC. And so what you are trying to do is you're trying to enable your partner or your sponsor or your media buyer to be wiser about how they're placing, where they're placing, and why they're placing. So you have this intentionality that comes into the mix when you have a group of similarly focused or at least similarly interested people, whether it's, you've got B2B with like Lutzi and Dylan, and you've got people that are more on the performance side and just more on the outdoor side. And I think the thing that you are able to do once you get into a consortium is you're able to say, well, we can A, B, C test these things for very low cost. And it's super fascinating as somebody who drives a very big budget in media buys. And so now I can dabble and basically perfect a message with low consequences, because if I'm only talking to 5 or 10 or 50 or 100,000 people, it's not as high impact as saying, I'm going to go run this ad on the Super Bowl, or I'm going to go run
for $10 million. Yeah.
Right. And the ROI there is garbage. I mean, it's like, it's just awareness and affinity. So I think what you guys are doing, or what everybody in LRL are enabling sponsors to do, or advertisers to do, is this look at how do I turn a small knob and make a big result? And that's super valuable.
So to back up and give a little more context to those who aren't familiar. So I put together this, initially called it a podcast collective. I'm now calling it a network. It started because I wanted to help people who needed help doing sponsorship. So it started with like one-offs and two-offs where, hey, I think that your audience is great for this. Let me match you with this brand or event or product. And very quickly that grew into doing it for 10 to 15 people and then 20. Once I hit about 20, I was like, okay, this is now not just, helping a couple of friends out, but this has much more of an impact for the brands themselves. And so it flipped from a podcast collective where the focus was maximizing impact for the podcasters to doing that and going to brands to say, do you want to test your way into the outdoor space? Do you want to test your way into podcasting? Here's a way to do it where it's way more effective than just, a shotgun approach of you doing 6 different podcasts as the brand and then saying this worked. Now how do I scale this? Because these podcasts have limited inventory. And so it got to a place where I did $110,000 in revenue last year. A handful of those deals were small tests, and a couple of them have expanded. One went from 16,000. It's going to be about 40,000 this year. There's a pilot that I'm finalizing with a non-endemic company that's a meat delivery company that sponsors IndyCar races. And so they have a very massive budget. And so he's like, I've got 6 to 8K a month to test with you for Q2. Like, if it works, terrific. If it doesn't, like, it's kind of like my play money. But we're creating programs for him where if it works, he already has a proposal for a $400,000 expansion that drives, at that point, real meaningful business impact. Another example is Wahoo, where they have a very expensive product. If we sell 3 treadmills, we break a positive ROI. And with that one, we went with 50% inventory for 6 or 7 shows instead of all the inventory, so that we can begin to get signal of which show is resident. Like, if any of them have a redemption, it shows that like the messaging is working, the audience is working, and directionally this campaign is effective, and we should probably double down on it. So it's turned into this like, hey, let me help you put some money in your pocket, to, okay, we have an agency that is operating scalable, testable model for these brands. And I think it's like, it works decently for endemics. There's a lot of brand conflict that exists where, like, I'm putting together a deal for Tailwind and SIS wants that person, and then but they signed with Hyperlight, but they're really friends with Scratch, so they go with that. So it's like, I don't want to play in that space. I can play in that space, and if I move fast enough, I can sign a bunch of deals in that space. But to me, it's like it's the meat delivery, it's the Caraway Home, it's the Rocket Money, which we've done deals with, where like nobody else is doing deals with these brands. There's no competition, and it stops the scroll, and you're like, huh, that's different.
What I think is interesting about how you guys have made this available is you're now opening the advertisers kind of aspect ratio towards or viewpoint towards potential ICPs. So when you look at traditional, fitness brands, they have a very narrow ICP, and they're going to spend a certain amount of money. But the intention of, this is the CAC associated with the user. Here's the average contract value that I'm going to see, and over the lifetime, the LTV of the client or of the potential customer. But when you have these meat delivery companies that are, they're putting their toes into IndyCar, which is not cheap. It's a very expensive sport. When you have people who are in the financial space that are trying to now tap into, for the most part, high net worth people that are, people who are active in the outdoor space are not, they have liquid funds that are deployable. So you're opening the aperture towards, more traction for an advertiser that might have already saturated their core ICP market, focus. But I think that the thing that is super compelling about the way you guys are doing it is it reminds me so much of kind of the evolution of internet advertising from the 90s to the 2000s in Web 1 and Web 2. And so you had like, Google ultimately replaced DoubleClick with AdSense because Google was able to do pretty much what you're doing, but they did it algorithmically. But what was super interesting about it was they were able to identify people that you would trust, which is literally the cornerstone, in my opinion, of your collective, of your network. Sorry. And so what you have there, once you have this inferred trust with a particular advertiser or speaker, and if you have the kind of the composite of the advertiser and the presenter, you've already done the hurdle. And then what you've done smartly is then you've built this network on top of it. So now you're starting to allow a user to have access demographically. So now you get to see like, well, this particular type of listener, I want my product to be in front of a female that's, 25 to 35 that is, has this much, disposable liquid funds over the course of any given month. And we're probably going to engage them for, a 12 to 18 month time span before they're going to reevaluate, the product that we're selling. So you're in this super, super kind of nascent opportunity. And I think with what you're doing and where you're doing it, because it's all cyclical.
So we've kind of taken taken half of the SWOT analysis out so far. We've talked through the strengths and we've talked through the opportunity. What are the weaknesses or threats of building something like this, given your experience?
You're beholden to the presenters, to the properties. So at the end of the day, you're at the beck and call of somebody who has potentially a large following. And if they go, can they reproduce it? Probably not with the collusion that you have, basically you're this aggregate power, but can they hamstring your operability? Yes. And I think that's one thing. I think the other thing that can be a threat, although it's not as severe, is this concept of being, you're distributed through third parties, and so you really don't have control, even unless you're going to build your own. And so I think there's a challenge there where if a solution that you're leveraging it's kind of like the creators on YouTube. So like if you're leveraging, if you're dependent on YouTube monetization, the minute the algorithm changes or the minute that that they decided to do paid consideration as opposed to preference consideration, then you're really in the weeds. Like you're screwed. So I think those are probably, in my opinion, it's the talent and content side that you no longer are the master of your own destiny because other people are driving that ship. And then the distribution channel. So if you look even back towards something like the Disneys and 20ths of the 20th century, you really had nowhere to go if you weren't in a distribution channel that Universal or MGM or one of the big names had for movies. So I think those are the two that pop out most.
Yeah, the other piece is the quality control and that trust factor. And I am not the only decision maker for partners. And so with 27, 30 hosts, like they're able to choose whoever they want to work with, and they can create their own conflict and they can create channel conflicts because sometimes a payday is better than no payday. And that's what I've been trying to avoid. I put out a piece on Substack, Why Fit Compounds. And I talked about the best example is a show within the network, Road to the Trials. And I was talking to one of the hosts and I was like, your show is like the Ferrari of podcasting. Like you are speaking to the front of the pack and everything you do should be premium, right? You should they're working with Precision, they're working with Wahoo. Those are two very premium brands. It's nice to work with a, startup watch company or a startup nutrition company, but like, that's not the vibe of a premium product, right? We talked about F1 a little bit earlier, McLaren and whatnot. Like, who are the brands that a Ferrari would partner with? It's not a Honda. The thing that works for, Mr. Dependable versus the thing that works for the Italian pony. Like those are two very, like, it's not saying one is better than the other. It's just once that alignment breaks down, it's, in my opinion, it's hard to get it back. Great. So there's a lot of, the whole thing is predicated on trust, and there's a lot of trust that I have to have in these hosts, and they have to trust that, if they ask for guidance on something that, just because I say this isn't a good idea, it's not because I'm not getting paid on it. It's because I'm thinking further down the road. And for me, it was all enabled and kind of unlocked by the fact that I hosted a podcast for 6 years. 5 of those years I had a full-time job, and like, that W-2 is what was putting food on my table. And so I didn't need to say yes to everything. And now this is how I put this and other things. It's how I put food on my table. But it trained me to think this way of, I literally once mailed a check back to a brand because I couldn't use their product. And it's like, it stopped working for me. And I ripped up a $6,000 check. And that's like a really great place to be in. But being in that place gave me the permission to be in the place I'm at now, I think.
Yeah, I think, you touched on something interesting. So in the trust kind of bubble, that's kind of where when I was referring to, you're not really the master of your destiny when you're beholden basically to your presenters and to your content partners. So I think there's, in addition to just the metrics or the influx of opportunity and revenue generation, you have this, there are kind of like, it's a phalanx of things that have to be bidirectional in order for it to succeed. I think that, to your point also, the power of no is super important. So you really, like, the thing, if you go back to the kind of the history that we were talking about, where we talked about DoubleClick and then we talked about Google. And so the demise or the descent of Google AdSense and AdWords has really come about through this outcome base. So that people were really like, you look at Yahoo in the 90s and they were literally like all short-term revenue. Like they threw all the crap at the screen so that they could generate the short-term cash, like you're saying. The thing that AdSense and AdWords started to win there and now has kind of declined because it's not as performant necessarily is this outcome based. So an outcome doesn't necessarily even have to be revenue, because, and I think your partners or your sponsors are identifying this opportunity. So the outcome is like the knowledge of how do I market. So a $10,000 pilot is worth like figuring out how I spend my money. Or is it like to your point about like events? Cool. This is how we resonate with this particular group across 5 properties. So let's go to this 1 or 2 and be sponsors of the in-person event. And so, there's an activation component to it now. So you've got an outcome centric. So there's another company that reminds me of that. I worked with the guys who started it ultimately, that are the founders. And they had this concept of understand why somebody's there. And it's not just, they're not just coming through and we're trying to steal their eyeball with a display ad. We're like, this is contextual. And we want to give you something that's complementary, so that you have an outcome. In this particular case, it's an app install. So it's a company called AppLovin, which is widely successful. So I think they did $4 billion last year in revenue. And it's like, these guys started in a room south of Market, 15 years ago, and with an idea, and really kind of like, when you take it with intention and say, cool, we're gonna look for quality, and we're going to look for outcome, and we're going to help give you metrics to drive towards that outcome, whether it's it's instantaneous or short term or medium term or long term, which I think the medium and long run is kind of the more apropos piece for your network. You have this gravitational mass that is super, super interesting.
If this episode is sparking something for you, we'd love to hear it. Share your takeaways on LinkedIn and tag Long Run Labs so we can follow along and join in on the discussion. Your reflections help the ideas go further and might be exactly what someone else needs to see in their feed today. This episode is brought to you by Superfiliate, the platform that finally makes partnership marketing simple. I've used just about every affiliate and partner tool out there, and most are just not great. Too complicated, too expensive, and way too confusing. Superfiliate changes all of that. Setup takes minutes, tracking actually works, and payouts are clear and reliable. It's the one platform I recommend because it does just exactly what it's supposed to. If you're a brand looking to grow through partnerships, Superfiliate makes it easy to get partners genuinely excited to share your products. With co-branded landing pages, flexible rewards, and built-in tools that drive action and make reporting simple, it's partnership marketing done right. Skip the headaches and head to superfiliate.com. Mention this podcast and your first month's free. You talked about the outcome-based goal, and it's interesting because some of the brands have identified this as what they're focused on. They're almost more interested in the directional knowledge of, if we put $1 in, what happens? Or is this audience even worth investigating? Like the meat delivery company, for example, like for him, it's a total, like he could light $25,000 on fire and, it's a rounding error in his marketing budget. But if it works, then it's the kind of thing that, he'd be damned if he didn't spend $250,000 to continue to test if it works. And that's the beauty of, to me, like a CPG or a company like that, where you do a test for $1 and it works. Well, you're not then doing a test for $2. You're doing a test for 10 or 50 or 100. And so I've literally heard this from some of the brands that like this is they're less interested in the conversion information and more in the like substantive and subjective, like how does this impact our business? And a handful of the brands are asking, like, how do I understand attribution better? And so it becomes like there's a bit of coaching that goes into like, I want to create the best outcome, but I also want to report on the best outcome. And if your systems are not equipped to catch the right information, then I am incentivized to help you equip your systems in a more effective manner. I just had a conversation with an event organization that was curious about attribution and going beyond coupon codes. I was like, I'll put all my cards on the table and tell you exactly how to do this, because if I do and you listen to me, we are guaranteeing ourselves a much better outcome. And I will look better, you will look better, and your boss will, pat you on the back.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's very similar to, if you look back to the 1960s and 1980s and the way marketing companies did focus groups and did consumer research. So they couldn't quantify what was happening at the shelf talker, who's checking out at the Safeway or the Kroger or whatever. What they could do is they could get sentiment. And they could, and from that, you could drive budget. And so it's a modern version of that. I think the power of what you're onto is that as you start to learn more how to quantify the target, viewer or the person you're engaging with. And then also on the brand side, how do you do the back office side of like quantifying that? Now you have something that's far more educated than it ever was in the 60s, 80s.
It's fascinating. I spoke to a friend who's at an agency and he's managed $50 million marketing budgets for brands before. And he's like, yeah, I'm getting put on a shoe brand for a running campaign, and they're looking at sentiment analysis. Like they're looking for top of funnel. And I was like, dude, let me give you the background on this brand. Let me give you all of the critical players in the space. I will tell you everything you need to know. And this is a turnkey solution for a top of funnel awareness play. And it's like you put $200,000 into that formula, you can't lose.
Yeah, I totally agree.
So that part gets exciting when like I've created infrastructure that then helps somebody else execute their job. So he doesn't have to go in and find, 50 partners and activate 50 partners. Like it can be the kind of thing that's just like, I don't know the space. You do your thing. Here are the swim lanes. Here's the budget, and go do it. And so for me, that's the beauty of it. Like I love asking the question of like what in these brand partner discussions, like what gets you promoted? What makes you look good in front of your boss? What are your KPIs? And I've gotten better at saying no. So if I don't think I can execute against that, like the conversation kind of dies from there. But if I do think I can execute against that, then that becomes like my favorite playbook to operate against. Like you have the answers to a test, you might as well, get 100. Yeah,
that's exactly right. I mean, I think the one of your Substacks in the last couple of months was talking about the friction of like getting the kind of flywheel going, and kind of like when the motion changes from doing the thing to winning the thing. I think it's not those exact words, but I think what you're able to do is, as you get more knowledgeable about the properties and knowledgeable about your potential partners, being the advertisers or sponsors, and what are the levers that you can pull. So you're going to have a baseline of levers that you're always going to be able to pull. But then you have this domain expertise that is kind of like the secret weapon of like, here's how, here are the table stakes that we're going to bring to you just by engaging with this network of 35 or 50, podcasts. But what we can do now is, by engaging with any one of them, there's the first and second degree derivatives of what engaging looks like. And so now when you're talking about the people that are creating content on your network, you now have this ability to say, well, these are the people who everybody's looking towards. So it's not just, the trust, but it's the aspirational piece on top of it.
Yeah. And there are certain key players that are represented in the network. So I've added a couple of dietitians. Shout out to Stevie Smith and Claire Shorenstein. And so I begin to have capability to create content that then is leverageable by the rest of the properties. There's also the ability to do guesting and, working with the brand. For example, Training Peaks is one that they just keep doing more with us because it continues to work. Jeremy, the vice president over there, listened to the show in August, and he was like, we got to figure out a way to work together because I like your thinking. And so he introduced me to his team, and we ran a pilot that we've since expanded, added another show to that. They're considering 5 more shows. And they've expanded for video on Instagram and YouTube. And so I saw a piece of content that Cliff Pittman put together about one of their CTS coaches working with Molly Seidel on training for Black Canyon and the use of Training Peaks. I was like, Well, this is fascinating. Why don't we have Cliff on a couple of the shows to talk about training Molly? And then Molly can come on and talk as well. And so this is like, then it's beneficial for the audience and the hosts because they're getting an interesting guest. And then the brand is getting earned placements, and we can distribute those earned placements as bonuses. Sometimes it's baked in and there's intentionality in that. But like, I got an email from Sean Van Horn, who's the PR person at Backbone on behalf of Training Peaks. And he just sent me the article. I was like, yes, I would love to distribute this, not just because you're asking me to, but because it's a great idea. And so that's where, to your point, there's way more depth that can be created beyond just the ad placements.
Totally agree. Yeah, I think at the end of the day, the thing that's interesting about when you bring something like a Training Peaks or some sort of really well developed and intentional product, you've got so much depth that you can bring to bear as far as to educate the end user, which may or may not be the ICP. You might be able to move them towards the ICP bubble or the circle. And I think Training Peaks is an interesting spot because there's so much saturation. They picked up and added virtual in the last couple of years, and there's with Strava now going to IPO in the next 12 to 18 months. I think there's they're going to be put into while it's not a 1-to-1 competition. When Strava bought Breakaway, Strava bought Runna, there's a natural gravitation there. So I think you want people to see the value and see the knowledge. And I think the knowledge of Training Peaks is what you don't get out of Strava. Strava is a tool, but when you go to Training Peaks, you have contact to, people at like CTS and all of the incredible coaches that use the platform. So I think there's, and that aligns with your, so if you are coming from this perspective of like more of a transactional product, it doesn't add value to the content channel. It doesn't add value to the end user. It just looks like you're being marketed to, where this is more like, we just want you to know about this because we think it's cool. It's kind of like how Let's Eat does CPG. It's like, it's super interesting.
Yeah, totally. I could talk for hours about this topic. Was there anything else you wanted to riff on specific to the network?
Yeah, I mean, the big question I keep coming back to is what keeps you up at night outside of, like, I know you're smashing your trajectory. So I think, I'm turning into the host for a second, but it's, what keeps you up at night about the evolution? Like, what are what are the things that you are like, I wish I knew this, or I wish I could wrap my head around this in my trajectory?
Forecasting and sales planning has never been a strong suit of mine in any sales function. Anyone I've ever reported to would agree. And at the same time, I usually hit my numbers, and end of quarter, I kind of just figure it out, particularly with enterprise sales. And so I started the year with 110 in January to match the 110 in 2025. And I've done a few tens of thousands so far in February, and I've got like 60 to 75 that I think will be committed by the end of the month. It is a short month, but that puts me at 200 by March 1st. That also puts me ahead of my scoped goal of $1 million on the year.
Awesome.
And the pipeline is like quite front loaded in that brands are committing a lot now, and they will also commit more in April, May, as it gets into the thick of, outdoor season. But for me, the piece is not matching up the demand with the supply. And that's right now I don't have high expectations from the hosts, but once I start creating that momentum, however, I paid out, I guess, $80,000-$90,000 last year to host. Some people got, I can look and see what the most was, but let me just pull this up quickly to give an idea. So there were a handful of people that got $10,000 or more, a handful that got $5,000 or more. If I hit my goal for this year, those numbers will be 10x, and a handful of people will make, $30,000 to $50,000 from this. That then becomes a real line item for their income. And for many of them, probably doubles their income. And so for me, it becomes a predictability piece, both for the machine overall and tooling up appropriately from both an outbound sales prospecting standpoint, and then a structure and reporting piece internally. And then the piece that I'm having the hardest time is like the communication internally and getting everyone aligned on using Slack. Like I can't get the guy that has the largest podcast to use Slack, but I paid him thousands of dollars so far. So that part's hard. That part, it's the like, yeah, I guess to answer your question, it's the mismatched supply and demand and the inability on my part to predict how to do that. But at this point, like I use AI as a CFO and chief of staff, and I can just dump this data into Claude and give it the context and then have it kind of back out the sales actions that I need to take so that I know that if I want to do $1.5 million, that will take $4 million in pipeline. To get $4 million in pipeline, I need 80 conversation. I don't know if that math works, but
sure.
Let's say I need 80 conversations, and to get 80 conversations, I need 1,000 quality outreaches. Have I done that this week? No, I emailed one brand, but I emailed 40 people at that one brand. But then on the flip side, like some of these deals can be so meaty that like if the meat delivery company experiences a good pilot, that's a third of my nut, right?
Yeah.
So it's like it's very hard to predict. And so right now I've created this insurance policy of myself where I'm not committing to these people that, hey, each one of you is going to get $30,000 this year. I'm like, we're learning as we go, but at some point it becomes a real amount of income for them. And then I have to do it again the next year, and I have to do it again the next year. Otherwise, it starts to break down.
Well, yeah, I mean, and because it goes back to that trust you talked about. So like, there's bi-directional trust there. So you've got, you trust them that they're going to make quality content that you can sell and that you can get sponsorship for, and they trust that you're going to get them paid. So, and once they rely on you, so now I'm getting a $50,000 nut from you every year. Like,
I got to keep doing it.
You got to keep doing it. Like, so the flywheel piece is extraordinarily stressful on an agency. And that's normally where agencies start to wither and break. And when you get into this, the media buying component of planning and buying. So it's highly lucrative. And, and when you get it, and when you can do agency markup, which is essentially the way you're making your money on the deal, I think there's a lot to be gained. But the devil's in the detail. So I think the thing that you brought up with AI, we could drill into this for like hours. And so I've had so many conversations everybody's having conversations about this right now. But I think the thing that people are overlooking with AI is, so you've got your domain expertise of what you do, but AI is only good to, in my opinion, to solve the 80% in the rule of 80-20. And so then you've got this 20% that applies to the Pareto principle. And that's what takes all the work. That's the devil in the details. So like you can work backward from like, I need to do $1 million. And what does that look like at top of funnel? And Claude's going to do a kick-ass job on that. And so what it doesn't do well, and neither does ChatGPT, or even come up with a realistically reasonable plan that you can follow. So like, it's like, I've listened to people say, well, I'll just pump it in there and then it'll give me the steps. I'm like, that doesn't work. Like the reason we built Slay was because we had people who were experts in cycling saying, we've tried AI and we can't figure out how to do this. And so you can use AI as enablers or powering your underlying motions or technology. But it really comes down to, you still need a couple domain experts that are 100% like the secret sauce there. And that's where you're going to watch the craft. And from the elite, like that's no different than running. Like that's, the people who are gifted are the ones that lead the way. Yeah. It's a fascinating time right now.
Totally. I saw a bunch of people talking about giving up AI, and I was like, giving up AI in 2026 is like deciding to go back to horse and buggy instead of, flying across the country in an airplane at 500 miles an hour. Like, it's there, the tool is available, and it's getting better and better every single day. And if you know about the domain, you can be extremely powerful with it.
Yeah, I think there's a yes and there. So the what AI does for you is it's a super exciting time for those that have domain expertise to bring to bear. So like for people who are using like the cursors or the base 44s or the replets of the world, building apps from, I've got this idea for this running app. I'm going to build the next runner and sell it to Strava. Like, you probably don't know the mechanics of what user engagement looks like. You probably don't really know the intricacies of like, how do you handle, mesocycles in training? How do you, like, what does nutrition look like? And then, and importantly, like, how do you do that for a mass market? So you really have like, you can get this 80% done and you're going to have something polished that's probably going to look close to Runna, but really it's not going to be any different than the 74 other AI generated tools that are out there right now that are all running Facebook and Instagram ads.
Totally. Let's talk about another place where domain expertise and trust is paramount. You've done some work in fundraising and angel investing. Curious to hear your thoughts on the role of angels and VC in the outdoor space.
It's tricky. So I know outside has a fund. I know, there are a number of organizations that have funding. I would say that you're starting to see really interesting, savvy investors coming through. I think through True. I think one of them that's a super compelling venture. And I don't know anybody over there. I watched their portfolio and watched their motions. You've got people on the periphery so there are kind of two, in my opinion, two types of outdoor and sports investors. You've got the people who are ex-athletes. So you've got the Lance Armstrongs of the world. And then you've got the people who have massive affinity. And so you're not necessarily an elite athlete, or you were an elite college athlete of some sort, and you have affinity for sports and you're really pushing yourself. And I think that if you have the idea that resonates, because raising money is a very personal experience. It's not like, it doesn't come down to just the numbers. You're buying the founders really at the end of the day. Like you believe that they have something, and it's not the idea. It's that they have this ability to weave this magic and solve this problem. And I think that's a challenge in the sports space because, and this is something we actually ended up looking to solve at Slay. And it was this concept of, when you finish sport, when you're done running, when you're done cycling, you're done being an elite athlete, you are screwed in the world, because you don't have necessarily, I would say 95% of elite athletes don't have something to fall back on. And so, you've got the 1 or 10 or 20 of them that are lucky enough to go become a reality host. You've got some that went and got, degrees that they can bring to bear in the business, but you don't necessarily have the pedigree or the work ethic outside of physical implementation of exercise and performance. So I think you see that in some of the industry investment, because they're looking for what makes them feel similar. And you see this in coaches a lot. So they're like, here's what I did when I was an elite cross-country mountain biker. But it has nothing to do with the modern cross-country scene. It has nothing to do with the physiology of a 22-year-old woman, when you're a 40-year-old man, and you were racing as a 21-year-old man in a completely different era and a completely different set of specifications. So when you look at the investors and where they're going to deploy funds, it's really like seat of the pants, and it's more gut feeling than it is if you look at the institutional investors like a Benchmark or an Excel or a Sequoia. So I think, sorry, I'm pontificating on that one.
Yeah, well, I had a conversation with a guy who, his boss is a billionaire and operates a fund with $100 million assets under management, and he was trying to figure out, he's a big runner, and he's like, how do we get involved in running, and can we? And I was like, if your minimum check size is $10 million, that really limits you on, what you can do and activate in the space. And so some of these much larger funds, like unless you're seeking tech only, like can CPG even handle VC?
Well, yes. So I think that you actually, maybe this is, there's LRL.VC.
I thought of this, yeah.
So because
like a syndicate, yeah.
Well, no, you become a boutique. So you become one of the tier 2, tier 3 VCs, and so you're working off of a $10 million or $20 million fund, and you're placing, you're writing check sizes in the area of 500,000 to $1 million, and maybe you're leading, maybe you're not. But if you become savvy enough then your LPs being this, this gentleman, you didn't even say it was a gentleman, this person's company with, $100 million of deployable funds, that you're bringing them the ROI in a very, very consumable fashion. So that's something they can do, because if they go speculate and it's like, well, I want to go invest in, Canyon USA, and I want to go invest in, XYZ new running shoe and XYZ new whatever, they have no idea what they're looking at from a domain's, perspective.
I had a long chat with Mel Strong over at Next Ventures about this yesterday or 2 days ago. And funny you mentioned Lance. Lance is one of her two partners in Next Ventures, and she also does some personal investing. And so, yeah, she had a similar recommendation. And then there's that distribution piece of all these platforms, all these podcasts, all the, the mouthpieces that exist, where it's like, talking about something is maximizing shareholder value. And the ability to weave in where you don't need a discount code, where it's like true brand marketing and positioning and awareness, and, rising tide lifts all ships kind of a thing like that. Those things are aligned. So I've begun to get into angel investing and doing it basically as a bet on the founders. I joke, but I said, like with Phil from Brooksy, like if he said, follow me into the burning room, it's the best way forward. Sure, Phil, right there behind you. Like, yes, sir. And it's like people like that you like, they will win and they will figure out a way to win. Yeah. And that's what it really comes down to.
Yeah, there's a really interesting. So I actually apologize. Back a couple minutes ago, I said true. It was Next Ventures. I was thinking of Mel and Lance, and so it slipped my mind. But I think that the thing that's interesting about where you see the returns on sports investment, like Warren Hellman put a truckload of money into PowerBar, and then when they got sold for $1 billion, it was a massive return. And I was there. I talked to him the day they announced it. It was a big ROI. So, but you don't necessarily have big hits like that anymore. And then you also don't have the savvy operational motion that figures out like how are we turning this into business? Because I think business is fundamentally changing when you look at the way you're having to market and when look in the way you spend. People are doing a lot more with a little. And when you find that diamond in the rough, the challenge is do they get snapped up so fast that your return on investment or your horizon is cut short? I think that's a challenge.
Yeah, it could be. The last question I have, maybe you have some thoughts on it. We're seeing a lot of big businesses and big money from Europe and Asia coming into the US and picking trail as either their focus or they're doing road and trail, like a Kip run, whereas Mountain Coast seems to be focused on trail. Nordic seems to be focused on trail, where 5 years ago, all these brands would be focused on road, in my opinion.
Sure.
Do you have any thoughts on why they're going trail?
I think it's a similar approach to in the cycling world why gravel got so popular. So it was, you've got enthusiasts that are finding the love of the sport and they're finding themselves consumed on a regular basis, where the running on asphalt, running traditional races has become very played out, and you've got massive organizations now running those events. You've got the rock and rolls of the world, and and it doesn't feel Berkeley's. It's not like it's this visceral kind of like I'm doing something that's really I'm at one with myself. Yeah. And I think that that you're gonna, if you're an early adopter there and you're an early entrant as a brand, you're able to now say you're able to associate yourself with this sport. When I have affinity for power bars today still because I chewed on them even though they were rock hard and the 32 degree weather. I
love those vanilla bars. My dad bought them all the time.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just you have an affinity. So like I think that's the play with gravel and trail, and I think it's not like you're not running into people all the time. You get to really I think there's also this movement in sport of finding yourself. I mean, you look at everywhere I turn today, there's a reference to flow state, and that was never referred to ever for about 5-10 years ago. Yeah. And if it was very rarely. So I think you have people trying to figure out what are those on-ramps to flow? How do I find like my optimal performance and experience? And I think brands that help you get there, you're going to have long, like the ACV and the LTV of a customer is going to be exponentially higher once you have that relationship.
That's a fascinating answer. I'm going to keep asking that question because I am so obsessed with different perspectives and finding different answers. But I also think that a handful of people will say almost exactly the same thing that you said. It makes so much sense.
Yeah, I mean, there's like I said, and I think you're on the cusp. But just to wrap it up, I mean, I think everything's changing, but it's changing in a cyclical fashion. So like the current medium is changing, but it's changing the same way the medium before it changed. So I think that's probably why you see these entrants, and I think it's being able to read the wave as right before you want to get on so you can ride its brake, and that's the game.
Love it, Jason. This has been a blast. Really appreciate you sharing your wisdom and expertise. Hopefully we can share some miles at some point, and I'll see you in the Second Nature Slack.
Sounds good, man. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, see ya.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Long Run Labs. If you like this episode, make sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with someone who's building something of their own. We'll be back next Tuesday with more stories at the intersection of endurance and entrepreneurship from the people shaping the outdoor industry in ways big and small. Until then, keep showing up, keep asking questions, and we'll see you out there. This show is produced by Dylan Delaney of Delaney Video LLC, with musical composition by Brian Walters of Single Track Sound, and managed overall by Emily Holland of Wild Poppy Creative.